everybody! Welcome to the Jayda InStitches show and Happy New Year! I love the new year. It smells like potential and possibilities and new projects. But there's always a couple of projects hanging around from the previous year that need to be finished up. And today I'm talking about my calendar blanket from 2016. Back at the beginning of this project, I told you guys that I knew I was going to have a big long space at the bottom of my blanket that I was going to have to fill in. There wouldn't be blocks of color that represent days because it was a 366 calendar day year. So I knew I was going to have a block, I was going to fill it in, and I told you that I was going to do some chain writing to sort of sign the blanket. So today's tutorial is going to be on how to use the chain stitch to do some crochet writing on a project. And this is a really good project to demonstrate that because it's a long piece, so it covers quite a lot of space. And I'm using 3 different things. So I've got 2 words, so it's kind of a sentence. I'm using an exclamation mark, and I'm putting numbers in it too. So I'm going to show you the very basics of how to do some chain lettering. It's really simple, it's a lot of fun, and I think the overall effect is pretty darn cool, if I do say so myself. So without further ado, let's hop right into today's tutorial by scooting over to the craft table. Let's get our hooks and our yarn and do a little writing. That's different. If you're going to add some chain lettering onto an existing piece of fabric, I recommend that you use the same sized crochet hook. In this case, it's a 4.25 millimeter or G6 that you used in order to make the original piece of fabric that you're going to add your lettering to. You're going to want a pair of scissors and a yarn needle, some contrasting yarn in order to make your lettering stand out in either the same thickness or a bit thinner than the actual fabric, the yarn you made this fabric out of. And in my case, because I'm working a long piece, I'm going to make myself a visual stencil as well. So I've got some paper, a marker, a pair of scissors, and some tape handy. And now we can jump into the tutorial. As seen before, this little strip across the bottom of my blanket is quite long, and it's difficult to sort of eyeball how I'm going to chain my words into it. And I'm thinking I'm going to write Calendar Blanket 2016 all the way across it. So in order to make sure that I have the right size of letter and I space them out nicely and I don't sort of squish all the letters or words to one side or the other, I'm going to make myself a stencil first that's the same length as this piece and the same width. Alright, it's a little easier to manage this stencil so you can kind of get an idea of how long the piece is. What I did was I cut my piece of paper into lengths the same height. So as you can see, they're the same height as my white band. And I taped a bunch of pieces. You can see I've taped them together here. Taped enough pieces together so that this is the same length as my band. Now, because this whole thing doesn't fit on camera, I'm going to decide where I want to start the words Calendar Blanket 2016. Okay, I filled in my words, my numbers, made sure that everything was spelt properly. And now this will be roughly what it looks like across the bottom of my blanket. So you can see I can kind of put my visual stencil down on top of that spot. And what I can do is just keep it just above this white spot while I'm working. And I can try and mimic the size of my characters as I'm chaining them. So this is really helpful, especially if you're working across a long space like I am, just to have sort of a visual size and spacer for your letters right in front of you, just so you don't end up cramming anything or you have an idea of how much space you have left. So that is my little stencil, and now we can start chaining letters. Once you're ready to start chaining your letters, grab your yarn and make a nice loose slip knot. What do I mean by loose? Well, once you make your slip knot, leave about the width and a half of one extra crochet hook in that loop. So you want a nice long loose loop. This is going to be your first loop, and you're going to need that extra length in the loop, and I'll show you why here in a second. Then take a quick look at your visual stencil. So if I'm going to begin with the letter C, I've got it laying across the top of my little piece of fabric here that I'm going to be chaining into. And with my finger or even my crochet hook, I'm going to just visually draw, okay, there's my C. I'm picturing the C, and that is the size and the shape that I want to work with. So I'll put my little stencil to the side, pick up my fabric, and right about where I want to get a good handle on it here. I want to start my C here. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to work in a nice fat arc all the way around in the shape of a C. So this is this little space. See this little space right here? I'm going to put my hook through that space. This is the beginning of the letter C. Slip my loop on my hook and carefully bring it to the front of my fabric. Taking care not to pull the whole thing through. You don't want the knot to come through. You don't want the little tail to come through. You just want a little bit of that loop. And if you've got a lot more of it on this side, that's good. Don't worry. Once you get a few chains worked in, you can come back and work in your short tail and it will stay in place. So don't worry about it. So you want to make sure you don't pull too much of that loop all the way through. Then, because I'm making a C, I'm going up in an arc. I'm going to go up on a diagonal to the very next space, which would be this one here, between stitches. I'm going to put my hook through it. Make sure that I'm not using the short tail. Grab the long working yarn, pull it up, and chain. And this can be a little finicky, especially if you're working on a big heavy blanket like I am. But just relax. Put something underneath it if you need the extra help holding it up. And just carefully work away at it. Once you get far away from the beginning of your little short tail, you'll be able to sort of feel the string underneath and you won't have to keep flipping the fabric back and forth, back and forth. All right, the letter C is sort of in this nice curve. I'm going to go across the top of the C now. So see, this is the next available stitch adjacent to the one that I just used. So I'm going to grab my little string here and keep it between my fingers. I'm going to feel for it underneath the fabric. There we go. Keep a little bit of tension on it, not too much, and chain. Then I'm going to work the next one. So I'm going to pick up that little bit of yarn and chain and pause. Now, does this look like my C is going in the right direction? Yep, so far so good. I'm going to start to bring it down now. So I'm going to hop down. I'm going to use this little stitch right here. Pick up this yarn. And now I'm going to go, let's see here, down again. Pick up the yarn, down again. Pick up the yarn, pause. Yep, definitely looking like a C. And you're working on a fairly pixelated surface, so you can, especially the longer, the wider a piece you're using and the smaller your stitches, the more spaces you'll have to work with, so you can create much more elaborate looking letters. Like you can do cursive writing, you can do block letters, but for now we're just going to do nice simple chain letters. And I'm still going down, so I'm going to use this one right here. Yeah, I want that one. And if you think, oh, did I use the right hole? You can always pause and go back and look and go, no, maybe I don't like that one. Pull it out gently and then do another one. You can always sort of backtrack if you have to. And now I want to start bringing it around. So I'm going to try to keep your loop flat. You don't want it twisting. You want to kind of keep it flat. So if you have to take your hook out every once in a while and reposition your hook and your loop, and go ahead and do that too. I find keeping it flat helps the letters lie better. The other thing you want to make sure you do is keep your loops relatively loose. If you start to tighten up, you're going to tighten up your letter and you're going to pull all of your fabric out of alignment. So try and take your time with this, especially until it becomes sort of second nature. Just do each loop one at a time and pull up on the loop. Maybe back up a little bit and sort of pull them around a bit to make sure that they're not tightening up on you. See, I don't think I like the way this is flattening off at the end, so I'm going to pull out a couple of stitches. Actually, I think I liked that one there. There we go. And I'm going to go down on an angle. I also don't want to get into this bottom line. I think I want to leave that open. So this is what I mean when I say, you want your visual, let's get my little my stencil back in here. You want your visual stencil to kind of help guide the shaping of your letter, but you want to make sure that you don't end up running out of space. So I'm going to go down to just before the last line, and that's as far down as I am going to go. And then I'm going to zip across the bottom of my C. Keeping my loops as loose as I can. There we go. Yeah, that looks like a C. I think I'll go a couple more across the bottom. And now I will begin to curve up. I'm going to go up one on an angle and then maybe a second one. I don't want this to look like a crescent moon necessarily, but I also don't want it to look like a G. But that looks like a C to me. Okay, once you get to the end of your letter, unless you're doing cursive writing, and in this case I am not, you want to leave spaces between all your letters, but you don't necessarily want to have to cut your yarn, which can be kind of annoying. So here's a fun little trick. You pull up on your last loop. So once you've finished, you're almost finished with that C. See, I want to come up one more. Pull up on your last loop, take your hook, come from behind, grab that loop, leave it still a little on the loose side, and then pull it down to the bottom, the underside of your fabric. And just pull up on that loop. Then pause. That looks like a C to me. Since we just began with this, you might want to take a moment to weave in your little short tail to kind of get it out of the way. That'll also secure your first loop and make sure that it doesn't come popping out the top, because this is still just sort of, it's attached to the next one, but it's still kind of loose. So you can take a moment and weave that little tail in back and forth. And then we're going to hop across and start the letter A. But before we do that, I'm just going to take a moment and weave in my little tail. Another quick glance at my visual stencil, and I see that I want my A to be about half the size of my letter C and with a little bit of a space in between. So I can put my stencil aside, pick up my fabric, and eyeball it. And I like to do this for every single letter. So I maybe want about the width of one stitch between my C and my A. I want my A to be about half the size of my letter C. So that gives me 1, 2, 3, 4 sort of space rows to deal with. And because you want to try to be as efficient as possible when you're working letters, my A is going to be mostly a circle with like a little sort of tail at the end. So I want to start my A in the bottom corner so that when I bring my circle around and join it, I can just make a little simple tail off to the side, and I don't have to worry about, oh, I started up here, but now my tail's down here. So think about actually writing, how easy it is to write before you start your letter, especially when you've got closed things like circles. And then you're going to flip your fabric over, put that big loop on your hook, and we're going to do a little chain cheating, or cheat chaining. We're going to chain, I don't know, maybe 3, 1, 2, 3. What we're doing is we're creating some space along the back for our yarn to travel so that we can have it in the right place where we need it to start our next letter without buckling our fabric. And if you have one too many, that's okay. It's better to have a little bit of extra slack on the back than to have it sort of pulling on the front. So I'm going to give it a 4th chain just to be on the safe side. Pull up on that loop, and I'm going to start, let's see, I think I'm going to start, I'm going to start my A down here. So hook goes through from the front, pick up that loop, come here, don't pull too tight, pull it back through to the front, there we go. And now I'm going to make my A by making a nice curving roundish circle-y thing over the sort of the 4 rows that I've given myself to work with. So let's see how good a little A I can make. So I've gotten all the way around. I'm just getting back to close in my circle. So I'll pull up on my loop. So that's where I came in. I went in a round, fat little circle. I'm going to close it back by going through the same space that I came out of originally. So I'm going to chain through here. And then because A's have a little sort of tail at the bottom, I'm going to maybe skip over a stitch hole. So from the back, grab the loop, pull it down, give myself some slack, and then fiddle it. That looks better. Yeah. What do you think? That looks A-ish, right? Right, next letter is L, and it's a straight line, and that's nice and easy. So I'm going to just skip over. So I'm going to make myself only one chain on the back here. I'm going to skip over one stitch. I want one nice space in between, so I'll pull it out here. Remember, be as loose as you can. There we go. And all I have to do is chain up in a straight line. Well, Jayda, there aren't necessarily stitches in a straight line. You see how they kind of go doot, 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 doot. So you can skip. When you're doing a straight line up or across, you can, the ones that sit next to each other are in alignment, but the ones that are going straight up, you have to sort of skip over a row. And since an L, if we look at my little stencil, an L is a straight line and it's the same height as my C, I can use all of that height to go straight up, and I can skip to the next sort of space that's directly on top of where I need it to be. So this is also a little bit of cheating, but not really. Just make sure you keep your loops nice and loose, and get a handle on your string back there. There we go. One. I'm going to skip up to, let's make sure I keep this in a nice straight line. That'll be the next one right there. This really isn't as difficult as it looks. There we go. And one more in a straight line directly up. So that one. And because that's the last one of my letters, that's the last stitch for my letter, I actually want to pull it through. So remember, this is sort of a little bit of a thinking game. There we go. Keep some slack on that loop, I should say. Keep it nice and loose. And make sure that, there, that'll be an L. Works for me. And that is what you do. So you make sure you leave yourself a little bit of space. Obviously, if you're using a color that's in complete contrast to the one you're working on, your letters will stand out better. But once you get them all on, you'll realize that they're a little easier to read. So this does look a little funny right now, but I swear it'll look like the word calendar when I'm finished. All right, back to my visual stencil. I've got the word calendar written down now, and there's going to be quite a big break before I start my next letter. So I'm actually going to close off this word and start all over again with the second word in my calendar blanket statement here. So I'm going to flip over my work so that I'm looking at the back. I've got my loop from the last stitch I made for my letter R. So I've pulled up sort of somewhat generously on it, not a whole lot. I'm going to snip my yarn now. I'm going to put my loop back on the hook, make it about flush but not tight with the fabric. You can see what I'm doing here. I'm going to chain one and then just pull the rest of it, sort of fasten off, pull the rest of it all the way through. There we go, and just knot that off. So I gave myself a little bit of slack by chaining one, and then I knotted off, and I'm going to take my yarn needle and weave that back and forth. And that will secure my R and in fact, the whole word calendar on my blanket. And now I can move along, start the next letter or the next word with the letter B, just like I did with my first word, making sure that I always consult my little visual stencil here, and then work on 2016 and my exclamation mark, and then I will be finished writing calendar blanket 2016 on the bottom of my blanket. And I'm pretty pleased with that, actually. It almost looks like my handwriting. Calendar blanket 2016. I am pretty pleased with those chain letters. A couple of tips. Remember, always feed your yarn from behind the fabric, so the wrong side wants to come in from there. Keep your loops nice and loose. Take your time. Stop every once in a while and make sure that it's going in the right direction. And remember to regularly consult your little stencil, and that will help keep your lettering on track and with the right spacing. And that's all you need to do some chain writing. Calendar blanket 2016. We're almost done. So the next thing I'm going to do is add a border. And a lot of you gave me suggestions on a previous blanket update about what kind of border I should use. And I've been looking at them all and I'm still deciding on colors. But once I get a decision made on the kind of border I'm going to put on this blanket, I'm going to do that in a tutorial as well. So if you haven't already given me a suggestion for what kind of border to put on my calendar blanket, please leave me a comment down below. I'd love to see it. And as soon as I've made a decision and I've figured out what colors I'm going to use, I will do a border tutorial for this calendar blanket. And that is that for this week, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so excited about 2017. It's going to be an amazing year full of awesome creativity, and I'm so excited to have you all along for the ride. So I will see you very soon on the Jayda and Stitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have an awesome week. Bye!